Have you ever wondered what it takes to make the glass on your iPhone so strong and sleek? Imagine holding your phone, tapping away on that smooth surface without ever thinking about the cutting-edge science behind it. But what you see on your screen is just the final product of a fascinating and complex process. Welcome. Today we're diving into the world of glassmaking. A high-tech process that's as precise as it is groundbreaking. We'll explore everything from the fusion of raw materials to the robotic precision used in shaping and strengthening the glass that covers billions of iPhones around the world. Get ready to discover the science and craftsmanship behind the glass that keeps your screen crystal clear and tough as nails. Raw materials and mixing. Gorilla Glass, the stuff that protects your phone from scratches and cracks, starts with a mix of raw materials that are sourced from all over the world. It's not just sand like you might think. Gorilla Glass is a bit more complex, made from a blend of highly specialized ingredients that are carefully chosen for their specific properties. So what happens next? Well, once these materials arrive at Corning's factory in Kentucky, they're funneled into what's known as the mix house. This is where the magic starts. Inside this building, giant machines called screw feeders guide the raw materials into massive bowls. If you've ever baked a cake, you'll appreciate this step. It's kind of like mixing ingredients to get the perfect batter. But instead of flour and eggs, we're talking about a mix of materials that have to be blended together just right to make the strongest, most durable glass possible. The key here is ensuring that the mixture is absolutely uniform. If even one little piece isn't blended in properly, it could ruin the whole batch. That's why the process has been fine-tuned over decades to guarantee perfection every time. The goal is to make sure that the glass, when it's finally formed, has the exact same strength and structure across every single sheet. Think of it like this. Just like how a cake recipe has to be followed exactly for the cake to rise perfectly, the composition of Gorilla Glass has to be spot on. Over the years, Corning has perfected this recipe, tweaking it to keep up with the demands of modern technology, like making glass stronger and more scratch-resistant for thinner phones. This is just the beginning of the iPhone glassmaking process, but it's a crucial step. Getting the raw materials and mixing process right is what sets the foundation for everything else that follows. Melting the raw materials. Once everything is blended, the next step is a bit of a journey, literally. The raw material mix is transported up 7 stories to the top of Corning's massive factory in Harrodsburg, Kentucky. Yeah, you read that right. 7 stories. Why? Because this is where the transformation really begins, in one of the most crucial stages of making the iPhone's iconic glass. At the top of the factory sits what's basically a giant oven, but calling it just an oven almost feels like an understatement. This thing operates at over 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. To put that into perspective, that's hotter than most lava flows from a volcano. The purpose of this extreme heat is to take that perfectly mixed batch of raw materials and melt it down into a thick, molten liquid that we call glass. It's kind of like turning solid cookie dough into a gooey, melted masterpiece. Except, of course, this dough is being prepared to cover millions of iPhones all over the world. But here's where things get really interesting. Corning is super secretive about what exactly happens in this stage. They've been perfecting this process for decades, and it's one of their most closely guarded secrets. They won't even let cameras film this part of the production for fear that competitors might try to steal their methods. You've got this huge oven designed to melt raw materials and transform them into molten glass. But the details of how it works are hidden away like some kind of industrial treasure. All we know for sure is that this step is absolutely critical in making sure the glass comes out strong and durable. It's pretty mind-blowing to think about it. This molten glass, which is heated at a temperature higher than most people can even imagine, has to flow just right to ensure that the final product, the glass that's going to sit on your iPhone, has no imperfections. The precision required here is incredible. A slight change in temperature or timing could mean the difference between a glass that shatters easily and the Gorilla Glass we all rely on to keep our phones safe from drops and scratches. This is where Corning's fusion process comes into play. While the exact details of the process are kept under wraps, what we do know is that the molten glass is carefully formed without ever being touched by human hands or even machines. The glass is literally shaped and strengthened in midair as it flows down from the furnace, untouched, which helps to preserve its pristine surface on both sides. This part of the process is what makes Gorilla Glass so unique and gives it that nearly indestructible quality. As the glass moves down the factory, cooling and solidifying, it's hard not to think about just how important this step is. Every piece of iPhone glass that's been made since the first model in 2007 has gone through a furnace like this, and over time, Corning has had to keep innovating. Apple's iPhones have become sleeker, thinner, and more powerful, and the glass that covers them has had to keep up. That means Corning has had to push the boundaries of this furnace process, making the glass thinner and stronger with each new generation of phones, shaping the molten glass. So, after the raw materials have gone through that insanely hot furnace, you might be wondering what happens next. This is where the magic of fusion forming comes into play. And honestly, it's one of the most fascinating parts of how iPhone glass is made. Once the glass has been melted down into this thick, lava-like molten form, it needs to be shaped and cooled without ever being touched. Sounds tricky, right? Well, Corning has this down to a science with their trough method. The molten glass flows from the furnace into a specially designed trough. Now here's where it gets really cool, pun intended. The glass actually spills over the edges of the trough and begins to flow downward. Picture a smooth waterfall, except instead of water, it's molten glass cascading down. As it spills over, both sides of the glass remain untouched by anything solid. This is absolutely key to ensuring that the surface of the glass remains completely pristine. No fingerprints, no machinery marks, just pure untouched glass. What's really happening here is a process of perfect balance. Gravity pulls the molten glass down while the air around it allows it to cool gradually. By letting the glass fuse in the air, Corning is able to create sheets of glass that are flawless on both sides. Think about it. This glass is going to be used on iPhones all over the world. It needs to be absolutely perfect because one little scratch or imperfection could compromise the strength of the glass or the quality of the display. Now here's something that will blow your mind. Corning's fusion process can make glass in all sorts of thicknesses. We're talking about glass that's as thin as 100 microns, just slightly larger than a strand of human hair. And they can also make glass up to 2 millimeters thick, depending on what the customer, in this case Apple, needs. This kind of precision is what allows Apple to create those sleek, ultra-thin iPhones that everyone loves, without sacrificing the strength of the screen. It's really amazing to think about how something so delicate and thin can be so incredibly strong, and it all starts with how the glass is formed during this stage. Cutting and packing. Once the glass is cooled and hardened into these pristine sheets, the next step is to cut into the right sizes. But here's the thing, humans don't touch this glass at all during this stage. In fact, humans don't touch the glass at any point during the entire process. That's because Corning uses an army of robots to handle the cutting and packing. These robots are programmed with laser-like precision, literally, to make sure that each sheet of glass is cut perfectly. After the molten glass has gone through the fusion forming process, it's time for the sheets to be scored and separated. Robots take over here, using laser cutting to slice the glass into sheets that can be as large as 9 feet by 10 feet. It's pretty mind-blowing to think about. These huge sheets of glass, which will eventually be trimmed down into the exact size needed for an iPhone screen, are so delicate but handled with such care. The use of robots isn't just for speed and efficiency, it's also to prevent any contamination. Human hands never touch the glass, which means there's no risk of fingerprints, dust, or even the smallest smudge affecting the final product. Everything is handled with the kind of precision that only robots can provide. ensuring that each piece of glass that comes out of this factory is absolutely flawless. Once the glass has been cut, it's time to protect it for shipping. The glass is laminated to keep it safe during transportation. It's a bit like wrapping a fragile gift in bubble wrap before you send it in the mail. Except here, the goal is to make sure that the glass remains in perfect condition as it's sent off to manufacturers all over the world. These giant sheets of glass are packed into crates, hundreds of sheets at a time, and shipped to various shipping locations. Depending on what the iPhone manufacturer requires, the glass might go through additional processes before it's finally assembled onto your phone. But at this stage, the glass is already incredibly tough and ready for whatever comes next. The ion exchange process. The glass still has one more major step to go through before it's ready to protect your iPhone from the drops and bumps of everyday life. This is where the chemical strengthening process, also known as the ion exchange process, comes in. It's like giving the glass its final layer of superpowers, making it tough enough to survive in your pocket, bag, or let's be honest, those accidental slips onto the pavement. Once the glass sheets are shipped off from Corning's factory, they go through a special treatment that enhances their durability. The magic happens when the glass is submerged in a hot bath of molten salt, heated to a very high temperature. This is not your regular kitchen salt, though. Inside this bath, something fascinating takes place: ion exchange. In simple terms, the glass is made up of sodium ions, which are relatively small. During this process, those smaller sodium ions are replaced with larger potassium ions. It's a bit like swapping out tiny marbles for larger ones, filling up the same space but packing it much more tightly. Now, why does this matter? Well, when those larger potassium ions squeeze into the glass, they create something called a compression layer. Think of it like putting on a suit of armor. This compressive layer gives the glass an extra level of strength, making it much more resistant to scratches, breaks, and those heart-stopping moments when you accidentally drop your phone face down on a hard surface. It's this ion exchange process that gives Gorilla Glass, and therefore your iPhone screen, that added toughness. But there's more to it than just swapping ions. This process ensures that the glass has a tighter, more compressed structure overall. It's kind of like packing a suitcase. When you squeeze everything in as tightly as possible, there's less room for movement, and everything stays in place. Similarly, the tighter the structure of the glass, the harder it is to break or damage. This is why, despite being thin and sleek, the glass on your iPhone can take quite a beating. What's really incredible is that this final step happens after the glass has already been shaped and cut. It's like giving the glass a last-minute boost before it heads out into the world. Once this ion exchange process is done, the glass is stronger than ever, with a surface that can handle all the everyday wear and tear we put our phones through. And let's be honest, our phones go through a lot. Whether it's being tossed into a bag with keys, dropped on the sidewalk, or even just handled constantly throughout the day, this glass needs to be ready for anything. Thanks to this process, the glass covering your iPhone screen isn't just tough, it's resilient in a way that most people don't even realize. All of that strength comes from the precise science of ion exchange, where tiny molecular changes make a massive difference. It's this step that takes the already high-quality glass and turns it into something truly extraordinary, capable of withstanding all the abuse a modern smartphone endures. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.